Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at, Liberia's past and present. And you've sent us this really interesting personal essay, War Crimes Crooks. And I think the author does a good job sort of bringing in the personal experiences along with historical analysis.
Yeah, definitely. That combination makes for a really nuanced, engaging read.
Yeah, and they start out right away with a vivid picture of the 1980 coup. I mean, just hearing about the radio announcement, the tension in the studio right before it happened,
Yeah.
It makes you think about like how much that single event kind of set things in motion for all the turmoil that followed.
Right.
And how much it still resonates in Liberia today.
Yeah, that coup is definitely a turning point. I mean, it marks the beginning of this period of instability and violence that's, directly relevant to the conversation happening now about a war crimes court.
Yeah, and the author seems frustrated that there isn't like a clear, agreed upon historical narrative about the coup.
Yeah.
Especially with some of those involved still holding positions of power.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder how a nation can really achieve justice and accountability when, those alleged to be involved in past crimes still hold so much influence.
It's a complex issue, and the author uses the decay of Liberia's national monuments, places like the True Whig Party building and the Ducor Hotel, as a kind of metaphor for this unresolved past. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like,
yeah, there's like a real irony in those observations, right?
Yeah.
Like on one hand, you have this physical decay of these structures, but at the same time, the author's saying there's this almost selective focus on wartime atrocities in the national narrative. It's as if other, significant parts of Liberian history are kind of fading from view.
Right. It's like certain narratives are being prioritized while others are allowed to just crumble.
Exactly. And that leads to this really thought-provoking analogy, the crab in the bucket mentality.
I know. I love that. It's such a powerful image, right?
Yeah.
The idea that seeking justice in a society where so many were complicit in violence could be like throwing a bunch of crabs in a bucket where they'll just keep pulling each other down. Right. It's a pretty pessimistic view.
And it is. And the author's skepticism about a war crimes court kind of hinges on this idea, They're worried it could become just another tool for internal strife instead of actually, healing divisions. It really highlights the challenges of transitional justice, especially in a context like Liberia's, where the lines between perpetrator, victim, and bystander are often blurred.
Yeah, and that kind of leads us to the author's personal encounters with figures like Prince Johnson butt naked and Charles Taylor. They describe witnessing the helicopter convoy that signaled Johnson's rise in 1990 and how these choppers kind of vanished from international news. It makes you wonder what else was missed, what stories weren't told.
Yeah, those personal anecdotes offer a glimpse into the complexities of the conflict, the difficulty of piecing together a clear picture of what happened, especially, from an outside perspective.
And then there's the contrast between the author's initial perception of butt naked based on photos and the reality of meeting him years later. To go from seeing him as this fearsome warlord to encountering someone who seems genuinely transformed.
Right.
It makes you question how we judge individuals based on their actions during such tumultuous times.
Absolutely. Those personal encounters are fascinating because they challenge us to consider what genuine transformation and accountability might look like in a post-conflict society. Can people truly change? And how do we reconcile the past with the present? These are questions that resonate far beyond Liberia's borders, It's interesting how the author frames the experiences of figures like Taylor Johnson and Blaahai in terms of betrayal.
Yeah, it's almost Shakespearean. The author talks about how Taylor broke out of prison in the U.S., went to Libya, got training, and then launched this rebellion. But there's this sense that Taylor himself felt betrayed by his own backers.
Right.
Like he was meant to be a pawn in some bigger game.
Yeah. And then you have that chilling account of Prince Johnson's betrayal of President Doe. The author describes hearing about the torture and killing on the radio, with Johnson referencing this mysterious sunshine who never responded.
It's really hard to grasp the level of ruthlessness and, those constantly shifting alliances that define that period.
Yeah.
And like the author points out, both Johnson and Taylor have managed to remain prominent figures in Liberian politics.
Right.
Despite their roles in the conflict.
It makes you wonder how a society reconciles its past with its present, especially when those who were involved in past atrocities are still part of the political landscape.
Yeah. And then there's Joshua Blaahai butt naked. I mean, talk about a dramatic transformation. He goes from being this terrifying warlord to someone who, at least outwardly seems, reformed,
And
passionate.
it raises a fundamental question. Can people truly change? And they atone for actions as horrific as those committed during the war. I mean, the author doesn't explicitly answer this, but their portrayal of Blahi seems to lean toward the possibility of genuine transformation.
Yeah, and that brings us back to the theme of forgiveness. The author points out that many Liberians, perhaps influenced by their strong Christian faith, tend to be very forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
They even suggest that someone like Charles Taylor could potentially win an election today if he were allowed to run.
That's a powerful statement, and it adds another layer of complexity to the whole discussion about the war crimes court,
Right.
If a significant portion of the population is inclined to forgive or at least move on, what role does a court actually play? Is it about delivering punishment, achieving reconciliation, or something else entirely?
It almost seems like there's this tension between the desire for justice, as embodied by the court, and this, very human capacity for forgiveness.
Exactly. And the author kind of leaves us wrestling with these questions, challenging us to think about what true accountability might look like in a society that's experienced such profound trauma.
And then, just when you think they're wrapping things up, they bring in this whole other dimension. The idea that focusing on economic crimes in addition to war crimes might resonate more deeply with Liberians.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they're saying, hey, there's this massive elephant in the room we haven't even addressed yet.
It is a fascinating shift in focus. They seem to be suggesting that tackling corruption would be a more tangible and immediate way to address the concerns of ordinary Liberians.
Yeah.
Potentially making the pursuit of justice feel more relevant to their daily lives.
And they connect it to this incredibly powerful statement from a recent Independence Day speech where serious corruption was compared to mass murder. It really makes you stop and think.
It does. It suggests that we need to broaden our understanding of accountability. Maybe addressing economic crimes alongside war crimes could offer a more comprehensive approach to justice.
Yeah.
One that acknowledges, the deep interconnectedness of these issues.
Corruption impacts people's lives in a very real way every single day.
Right.
It undermines trust, it hinders development, and it perpetuates inequality. It's like this slow-burning fire that just erodes the very foundations of society.
And by linking economic crimes to the violence of the past, the author is essentially arguing that they're two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
Both stem from a lack of accountability, a culture of impunity, and a system that allows a select few to benefit at the expense of the many.
Then just when you think the author is about to offer some solutions, they throw this question back at the reader. So who should this war crimes court be for?
Right.
It's like they're challenging us to examine our own assumptions and expectations.
It's brilliant. Instead of providing easy answers, they're prompting us to think critically and engage with the complexities of justice and reconciliation on a deeply personal level.
And that's where they leave us with a lot more questions than answers.
Yes.
It's thought-provoking and unsettling, but also incredibly compelling.
Definitely makes you want to delve deeper into Liberia's history and the ongoing challenges it faces.
As we've been talking about all of this, something the author mentioned earlier keeps coming back to me. It was that subtle point about Liberia's national monuments. They said that even people with different views on the true Whig Party's legacy agree that, neglecting these buildings hurts everyone.
It is a fascinating observation. There's a shared understanding that preserving these structures matters.
Right.
Regardless of, your political stance.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder if there's a parallel with this whole debate about the war crimes court. Could focusing solely on past violence without addressing the systemic issues that cause these conflicts actually divide Liberians even further? Shouldn't the goal be to foster a sense of shared responsibility for moving forward?
Yeah, that's a really valid point. It highlights the need for a more holistic approach to justice and reconciliation.
Right.
We need to acknowledge the historical complexities and the trauma and how, war crimes, economic crimes, social inequalities, they're all intertwined.
At the end of the day, a war crimes court needs to achieve more than just punishment. What good is it if it doesn't lead to lasting peace and stability? How can it create a more just and equitable society for all Liberians?
The author kind of leaves us grappling with those very questions. Any meaningful transitional justice effort has to consider these things,
Right.
It's not enough to just punish.
Right.
We have to understand the context of the crimes, address the underlying grievances, and create ways for, healing and reconciliation.
Maybe that's where the author's suggestion about focusing on economic crimes alongside war crimes comes in. It's not about ignoring the past,
Right.
but understanding that justice has to be multifaceted and focused on the future.
Precisely. By addressing corruption, promoting transparency, and making sure that economic development benefits everyone, Liberia can start to break free from this cycle of violence and impunity.
So to return to the author's question, who should this war crimes court be for? Maybe the answer is it should be for all Liberians. Not as a tool for revenge,
right,
but as a way to truly confront the past, commit to a more just future, and, show the resilience of the human spirit and the potential for change.
Well said. I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
We have. Thank you for joining us on this journey, exploring Liberia's complex history and the challenges it still faces. We hope this deep dive gave you some new insights and maybe even inspired you to keep learning about these issues. The pursuit of justice and reconciliation is a journey that requires all of us to pay attention, engage critically, and believe in the possibility of a better future.
You may not see it until you're claim that it was not there at all. And I see, baby, don't you know? You hold me down because my feet are on the ground. Play your mind, you're a sign of the time. You hold me down till my spirit leaves the ground. It's your choice if you want to pay your precious time.